For the Denver Broncos on day 3 of training camp, it's a marathon, not a sprint. According to Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, he believes in giving the players a little bit of reprieve on that third day as the Broncos ramp things up. What did we take away from day 3 of Broncos camp? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, everybody in Broncos country, for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day. We're available on your favorite audio platforms, podcast and providers, or if you want to watch us, available on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe, that follow, or that like button if you have yet to do so, as is, so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, my friend, day 3 of Broncos camp on Friday. The sun was back out, and there was a lot of excitement with a jam-packed crowd of over 3,200 fans sitting on the berm, but it was a little different than the first couple days because the intensity wasn't as high, and that was all part of the strategy here for this Broncos team. But let's talk about Jerry Jeudy being a key standout guy for the Broncos here on day 3 and seemingly a focal point of the Broncos offense.
Well, certainly the walkthrough not as exciting for those 3,000 plus fans that attended practice, but definitely everybody got to be excited to see Jerry Jeudy continually getting involved. I mean, practice after practice so far, we're 3 practices in, and it feels like Jerry Jeudy's name has been called quite a bit for a lot of good reasons, right? And obviously, you know, there's been concerns about dropped passes at the beginning of his career and things like that. You want to see him continue to improve, but man, Jerry Jeudy can separate even when you're going through a jog through. He still finds ways to separate. I love that he said after practice as well, you know, somebody asked him, if it wasn't a jog through, do you still think you would have celebrated the touchdown or whatever? And he was like, you know, if it wasn't a jog through, I probably still would have made the play anyway. So you love the confidence from Jerry Jeudy, and you love to see him making improvements. I mean, and it's great to hear Nathaniel Hackett speaking very highly of him as well. It's kind of been a rocky offseason for Jerry, you know, with the incident that happened earlier this offseason, and then obviously coming off a year where he had 0 touchdowns. It's great to see him making strides and getting really involved heavily early on.
And I feel like Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson are doing everything that they can to help build up Jerry, help build his confidence up. Because, I mean, I think being in Jerry's situation, especially with last year, my confidence personally would be at an all-time low. But Jerry has demonstrated this confidence to him this offseason. And throughout 3 days of training camp practice, Sarah, look, he's looked good. You know, contrary to the narrative that, he had one drop. Who cares? One drop in practice, I don't worry about that. As long as that doesn't carry over in the game, I don't think Broncos country should be concerned about a drop in practice. But Jerry looks good. His route running ability, even Justin Simmons in the interview that I did with him said, hey, every time we go to line up, we're trying to figure out where's Jerry Jeudy lining up because he's the guy that we really have to focus a lot of our attention on because he can hurt us. And the way that the Broncos are using him, I mean, it's a multifaceted role. They're using him outside, they're using him inside, and they seemingly like to go to him a lot now on Friday's practice at the UCL Training Center with the sun out, by the way. Once again, another scorcher in Del Valle. It's going to be the same way on Saturday for the NFL's back together celebration. Make sure you wear some sunscreen for that. Jerry Jeudy was targeted a lot in the red zone period. Now, as we mentioned, the jog through pace for the defense, they're not doing anything. They're not making plays. They're not trying to make plays on the football. This was more so of a time for the offense to go through their route concepts, to work on their landmarks, where they're supposed to be, timing of it, and just being able to see how it pieces things all together for the offense in the grand scheme of things, even utilizing the tight ends a lot in the passing game on Friday's practice. But Jerry Jeudy would have caught 3 touchdowns. And as you mentioned, I'm glad that you brought it up. Even if it was full speed, he said the end result would have still been the same. Jerry's got his confidence back to him. It's nice to see, and had a chance to see him after practice, walking up before he went onto the podium, and he just seemed like he's in really good spirits. So that's something I really love to see with Jerry Jeudy. It just helps me believe that even with the stuff we're seeing with Cortland and Tim Patrick, and we're seeing other guys get acclimated, Eric Saubert with the offense, Jerry Jeudy will be the focal point of this Broncos offense for Russell Wilson. I think it's evident out there through the first 3 days of action.
Well, and with Jerry being the focal point, I think what's really key from that is that you can build your offense kind of around that, right? You can see what defenses are doing to defend Jerry Jeudy and kind of make your decisions based on that, based on what they're doing. Because if Jerry's consistently getting open, you're just going to throw the ball to Jerry. And if they're covering Jerry Jeudy, then you're going to go to Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton and these tight ends and the backs out of the backfield. And it's kind of going to be a pick your poison. I think it's getting very, very underrated. Like a lot of this talk about the AFC West and how good every quarterback is and all the pieces that have been added to every team. Like the addition of Russell Wilson cannot be overstated, because now the Broncos are going to be able to play offensive mind games with other teams. It's not just a matter of being better offensively. It's now you're going to be keeping defensive coordinators up at night on Saturday nights going into game day on Sunday, because how are you supposed to defend this group of receivers? And I know a lot of teams want to be able to say that, and that's fair. But at the same time, I just think that that's the biggest difference for this Broncos team. You're taking a defensive unit that's been one of the top 10 over the last 3 years, and you're now combining it with an offense that's going to be a pick your poison style of offense. And we saw that in Green Bay. How many times? I mean, we saw Devontae Adams have a ton of success. We've seen Randall Cobb have a bunch of success. And obviously guys like Alan Lazard, Robert Tonyan, Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, all those different guys playing a huge factor. And that's what Nathaniel Hackett is bringing to the table, a collaborative offensive style of play calling where you can feature a guy like Jerry Jeudy in the offense and say, hey, wherever he's going, you better be paying attention, because he could blow the top off the defense just as well as he can, shake free within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And that's going to change everything for everybody around him.
Not only is Nathaniel Hackett bringing that offensive-minded approach to the Denver Broncos that he's had some experience with Green Bay, but he's also bringing his philosophy on preserving player safety throughout the grind process of training camp. We tell you a little bit more about his philosophy and why the Broncos were doing a walkthrough and jog-through pace on Friday's practice. You get that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about our good friends over there at BetOnline.net. Now, BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games this season. You can find reviews and news of every league, whether it be Major League Baseball, NFL, NHL, MLB, esports, combat sports, and even golf, all in one place. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and more. They have you covered. So head to betonline.net today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. There's something about day 3, according to Denver Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, that he wants to take an emphasis on preserving player safety. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much tuning in on your favorite audio podcasting platforms or watching us on YouTube. But really the story for Friday's practice in terms of the jog-through pace that the Broncos had, with the emphasis on the red zone, really just working on the wide receiver routes, the timing concepts, and even the pass protection in terms of how they're tying up blocks, how they're adjusting to maybe a slant by the defense. This was an offensive day, and the defense kind of lost by default. So nothing to read into the defense. There was really no realm for them to perform on Friday's practice. But for Nathaniel Hackett, he said one thing he learned while he was in Green Bay was the day 3 thing. So for me, I was wondering, it's like, what does this mean? But he went on to clarify by saying, usually after you have 2 days of high intensity work, usually that day 3, especially with the heat being the way that it was today at the UCL Training Center, that usually a lot of times you see injuries happen on that 3rd day if you don't ramp down the intensity. So he said for me as a coach and for us, it was a test, because we had to figure out, we had to go through the whole tempo check and make sure nobody was going too hard. And he said, the team passed with flying colors. I talked with Calvin Anderson after practice, Sayre, and he said, hey, the thing I really like about Nathaniel Hackett, he believes in preserving our bodies, because Sayre, the pads come on next week. I believe it's Tuesday, and then it ramps up. I mean, beginning on Monday of next week, the Broncos have 6 straight days of practice, and they're going to throw the pads on. And then the next week will be the same exact storyline, except that upcoming Saturday, it'll be a preseason game.
And it's crazy to think that we're already that close to football. I mean, my goodness, training camp is great enough, but man, the games are going to start coming back here really quickly. But man, even just hearing that Calvin Anderson said that, it speaks volumes to just the 2 different regimes that have been in the building the last 2 seasons, right? I mean, obviously Vic Fangio's regime, maybe not necessarily known for the preservation of the players' bodies out there during practices. But you know what? I think that ultimately it's great for the players just because it gives you an opportunity. Just like if you work out during the week, right? You're not going to go balls to the wall for 7 straight days. You're going to have days that you either take off, or you're going to have days that are sort of active recovery. But you can't expect professional football players to be any different. I mean, especially considering how rigorous it is being out there. And you're right, the pads go on Tuesday, and you got a day off on Sunday here. So definitely things are going to start ramping up quite a bit. And it's just like anything else, right? You immediately go in, you're going high intensity for the first 2 days. The juices are flowing, the adrenaline is flowing. You need a little bit of a day like this just to kind of walk through, because as with anything, and we heard a number of players talk about this, the mental aspect of football is just as important as being out there and being physical, because like I mentioned in the previous segment, with the offensive mind games that you can play by utilizing your playmakers right, well, you're not going to be able to utilize your playmakers right if everybody's burnt out, if everybody's bodies are getting beat down. So you got to be able to get out there and get good mental reps going through your jog through, and really playing like, hey, we got games coming up, we want to preserve our players, we want to get them right, and get this playbook down pat, because that's the most important thing at this point, is being on the same page and creating that chemistry.
It just goes to show it is a marathon, not a sprint. And one thing this coaching staff has really harped on, and Nathaniel Hackett has said, it's like it's a 17 game season. It's not about playing just your best football in September. You want to have all of your guys available in December, when all those games mean a lot more. And especially for the Broncos, a lot of their AFC games are in the back end schedule. The AFC West divisional matchups are in the back end of their schedule in that December timeframe. And Denver needs to be at their best ability. They need to have the best availability, and that's something that Nathaniel Hackett is really preserving. And I will make this observation. I've been to a Vic Fangio training camp, and I've just been to a general Vic Fangio practice. They do so much more stuff. And that's really where like players' bodies were starting to wear down a little bit. I know a lot of people want to blame the Broncos strength and conditioning staff for how players kind of fell apart and had health injuries last year. But here's the deal. A lot of that is how often you're on the field. With Nathaniel Hackett, I always call it they're on the field with a purpose. Like they're in, they're out. They're not doing unnecessary football stuff just for the sake of doing it. Hackett's done a really good job with his staff, and they've been very on top of preserving player safety, player bodies, which I think will bode well. And Sayre, I think for us, this team is so talented. The roster is so talented. If they can continue to preserve this much of the offensive roster, defensive roster, when they go into the regular season, they will have a chance to be one of the best teams in all of football. And I think this is also something that kind of branches off to another topic of conversation. I think so many people in Broncos country are worried about the Raiders. They're worried about the Chiefs. They're worried about the Chargers. You just have to worry about the Broncos. Let the Broncos focus on that 1 week at a time. And I've always said it like, hey, I approach the Broncos schedule 1 week at a time. We don't look too far ahead because certain things will happen in between that maybe change the narrative. Focus on the Broncos. And that's really all that Russell Wilson and this team are. They're focused on the process themselves. They're not worried about anybody but themselves. And I think that's a very good mentality to have. Just continues to show Nathaniel Hackett having that trickle-down effect from his philosophy as a transformational coach. Will it translate into wins this upcoming season? I think will be a big storyline. And so I'm excited to follow along. I think it's going to be a fun season to cover this Broncos football team here on Locked On Broncos.
It really is, and what's exciting is just the change in the air, right? I mean, there's so much optimism, there's so much positive energy around the team right now. And what was really cool was getting to see Derek Wolfe come back to the practice as well on Friday, really getting the opportunity to hear the fans howling and cheering him on, and see him retire as a Denver Bronco and sign that 1 day contract. I mean, just really, really awesome to see how, family like this Broncos country fan base is. I mean, once you're a Bronco, it's kind of ride or die for this fan base. It is, especially for legends like Derek Wolfe, right? I mean, who really was an instrumental piece for that team. And to see him come out there and be embraced, I mean, you can't help but think these players that are out there on the field practicing for the team right now, who are on the 90-man roster, you see a guy like Derek Wolfe come back, and you see the way that fans embrace somebody that helped bring a championship to the city of Denver. And you can't help but think that that's going to rub off on them as well. And what I love about what Derek Wolfe said is, he said, you find somebody who's doing it right and follow them. I think that for any walk of life, and for these players players. For Nathaniel Hackett, he's talked about that before, about how he's always wanting to learn from coaches and leaders that are great, and the players should be doing the same exact thing, and that's why I love that the Broncos are constantly challenging each other, and they've got a great leader in place in Nathaniel Hackett, great player leadership from Russell Wilson, and obviously Justin Simmons as well, among other players. But it's just cool to see. It's a great atmosphere. I think that right now, I mean, it feels still like the Broncos are in this honeymoon stage with all this new that's happening this offseason, but it's all really good stuff. And I think you can't help but love it if you're a fan of the team. If you're just if you've been covering the team, even, it feels like there's a different energy from the people that are covering the team in the media as well. Just a really, really positive vibe around the team right now. And obviously that's going to get a little rocky as these games start happening. One loss happens and all of a sudden you get questions, but man, you can't help but think that the culture has been shifted for the better.
Players are definitely feeling it, and like I said, just the excitement is there by the players. They're in, they're out, and look, even after every practice, they're going to hit the weight room. They're getting a workout in, help get that lactic acid out, and then they're going to recovery. I mean, they're fed well after practice. They have a protein table with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and nutrition bars and whey protein. Like, they are well taken care of, and they're also doing walkthroughs at night, but they're also doing team bonding stuff as well throughout training camp. That's what has me excited, because I think all that stuff matters in the big picture. When things get very tough on the field, when you do face adversity, how close are you in that locker room? How close are the guys there? How close are you with the coaches if you're a player? That, to me, I think means everything, because we saw when things got rough last year for the Broncos. I mean, the locker room, the coaching staff had lost the locker room at that point. And when that's the case, it's hard to overcome a lot of that. But the players, they fought for themselves, which is why Denver was really competitive last season. Now, I wonder what it's like when the coaching staff has their backs and they're excited about the coaching staff. A lot of fun storylines to watch. But Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Friday's practice in the books. Saturday's practice is back together Saturday, a widespread celebration across NFL training camps by the NFL. It'll be a big extravaganza for the NFL Network. Russell Wilson, George Payton, Nathaniel Hackett will sit down with James Palmer, Colleen Wolfe, and Brian Baldinger on the NFL Network. Make sure you check that out. Plus, practice is sold out officially. There's expected to be 5,000 on the berm in the Valley for Saturday's practice. Make sure you tune into the Locked On Broncos podcast for all your training camp recap, courtesy of Sayre, Bedinger, and myself. We have you covered. Jam-packed episodes all week long as the Broncos go throughout training camp. We got you covered.